Hey, and welcome to our second episode of Great Conversations. Today, we want to talk about how to speed up actually the building process in WordPress, not only from a designer's perspective, as well as we try to focus on an agency perspective as well. With me is Mark. Mark, hi again. You know us from the Speak with Jamie. How are you?
Doing great, Thomas. Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. So, actually, we had another speed build today with my team colleague Jessica against Matt Maldenwick. So, did you watch it?
I did. That was
Yeah,
quite the show.
yeah, definitely, definitely. But yeah, as we already talked about as well, like these speed build challenges, yeah, I mean they're for fun. They're
Mm.
and when we're talking about like live and actual projects, I guess you're on the same page as me. We, yeah, would do it differently. But actually, what have you felt back then when you first saw the website in the speed build and Jamie presented this website to us?
Yeah, that was a time. That was an experience. Yeah, so I think if I'm remembering correctly, the first thing that I remember seeing was a vertical navigation menu. And I think to this day it's still the only website with the vertical navigation menu that Jamie threw at somebody on the show. So that was fun. Layout wasn't too crazy. I was using like bricks, ACSS, and frames, so I did definitely kind of utilize some pre-built sections and like especially that horizontal or vertical navigation there. Um, it was definitely an interesting layout. I mean, I'm not sure if I would build a website like that, but I'm always interested to see how you build like more creative and interesting layouts. Because when you are a web designer for a long time and you're scouring across the web, it does get kind of repetitive, and it's nice to see something different once in a while and try to build it.
Yeah. And talking about web design and doing this kind of stuff a lot or a lot of the time. So, actually, how did you come into the whole web design game? So, what was your basic idea behind it? Why did you start building websites?
Yeah, so I'm 28 now, and I was like, I graduated college. I was like, 22, came out of college, was working for just like a real estate firm in like the technology and marketing department. And that's where I was literally sitting next to guys that are probably more like you and your team rather than me, because I didn't have like a programming background specifically. I learned some things in college where that was like where I first learned HTML and CSS, but I'm building stuff with like whatever they were called before, almost like tables as websites, and it's crazy. So, um, learned a little bit of maybe Bootstrap towards the end of my college
Mm.
career there, and then I was in marketing, and like I said, and I was sitting next to guys that were building with, like, ASP.NET
Yeah.
in, Visual Studio or whatever at the time. So that was really intriguing. I played around with that for about 5 minutes, and then I was like, "Nah, I need something a little bit more visual." And at this time, where it's like maybe 2016, 2017, they told me about WordPress, my colleagues did, and I was like, "Well, let me try that out." And I was about to quit WordPress right away because I was looking at the themes and I'm like, "How am I like what like I thought this was gonna be more like a put things anywhere you want, so to speak." And then I found the big page builders, like specifically Elementor. I was like, oh, okay, so I can kind of like not be a graphic designer, but I could be more of like a visual web designer, so to speak. And
Yeah.
that was kind of my trajectory into it. And then ever since then, I'd used Elementor for years. I switched to Bricks recently, and I'm just exploring all the different tools.
Yeah. Yeah, quite interesting because I think we had some kind of similar approach to that.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I myself studied communications design back then at a time where design and development was completely two different things, especially when it comes to the university. And I always wanted to go more into a development or more into the development. But the thing was that I always was more like as well a visual designer. So I needed some visual interface to build actually something. And I started actually with WP Bakery. Yeah, it's one of the oldest page builder, and it was still more focused on the back end. You could work really structured in a way if you had a robust theme and a robust version of your tech stack. So front end wise, you already knew, okay, so if I do this in the front end, it will look like that. But yeah. at some point, I changed as well to a complete visual, editor. For me, it was like the biggest change ever. It was the switch from WP Bakery to the block editor.
Right.
The block editor was really at the beginning.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, when we're talking about building websites, so how do you approach like a project? So not only from a designer's perspective, as well as from a agency freelancer perspective. So how do you approach the process?
Yeah, so, I mean, to go back again, it was like 2017, 2018. I started building. I still had like a, 9 to 5 job. I started the agency, so to speak. I've always pretty much been like a solo agency to like maybe like a couple freelancers, never like haven't built out a big team or anything like that. It's just not something that I've tried yet. But yeah, during that time, every single time like I would approach a project, and I will tell you, probably like most people, my approach has varied widely over the years. It's gotten way better over time, and
Yeah.
I'm still by no means perfect. But the first project I ever did was like, all right, just give me $500 and I'll figure out how to do this. It was a nightmare. I wasn't using any real like proper dynamic data. I always tell the story. I was like throwing stuff into the posts and like trying to categorize it, but they were all different types of content. It was a nightmare. But I was initially drawn to that, and maybe it was because of the first thing that I ever did was very dynamic in nature. Even though I'm not like a programmer by trade, and I don't write software like often by any means, I still like the idea of. I'm also not a designer, so I'm kind of like somewhere in the middle. So I try to like use the tools to create something that's, in that layer of abstraction where like I'm creating cool stuff, but like I'm not actually writing the stuff. So from each project perspective over the course of the time, especially as an agency, I've always really had that idea of wanting to create projects that were more complex. There's the concept of just like, pumping out like maybe $1,000, $2,000 simple brochure sites. It's definitely a viable business model that I've given a lot more thought to over the years because it is straightforward and it definitely serves a purpose. But it was never the thing that came to me and like was my passion. I always wanted to build like e-commerce. I was always enamored by like, somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, we want like a platform, like group membership platform for our members to have, videos on there and documents they can download and all sorts of chat and other things." I was like, I know that there's tools out there that I can integrate together and configure to make this work, and I can make a really cool experience. Those were always the things that stuck out to me, and those projects are way different than a simple brochure site. They should cost more, they take more time, and everything like that. But those were the projects that I was trying to approach, and we could get into how, so to speak. But that was kind of where I was at, as far as like just naturally.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's often the way that you start like with smaller project, and when we're talking about like page builder or websites who were built with a page builder. So as a normal designer, you start building everything visually in the page builder. But when you talk about project like these, we're talking here about dynamic data. We're talking here about structure in the backend as well. So you need to make sure that everything is not only like a visual appealing in the front end, but you have to get the structure in the back end right.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's basically one of the first things I'll always have in mind when it comes down to, okay, I want to reuse these assets as well in another project. Because when you build such a structure once, you know how much time and effort you have to put in. And doing this all and over again in each new project, could be a big time problem. And if you structure it right and you build like the whole frame out and you can reuse it on every project, I mean, for you, it's like a huge time saver then because you can just simply put it in and start building and then maybe finishing the front end design only. Yeah. So, what is your current tech stack? I think it was Bricks and ACSS.
Yeah. So like bricks, ACSS frames, WS Form for forms and things like that. There's probably a ton of other things in there, but those are the main building tools, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you approach these structured data with these tools? Is there a specific workflow you follow?
Yeah. So I guess I left that one out then. That's a big one. Normally I'll tell you a quick story, like, in relation to this. When I started using when I was using Elementor before I moved to Bricks, a few years ago at this point, I was really getting into dynamic data, and obviously Advanced Custom Fields Pro and everything are like kind of the gold standard, but there's a ton of really good options out there. When I was in the Elementor days, and this is the other thing that every time I have a conversation like this, the landscape changes so much so
Mm.
fast, as you know, that you almost have to like bucket in like, well, I was doing this then, but maybe it's a different time now. When I was building in Elementor, there weren't the tools that there were now in Elementor. Like you couldn't do custom loops, you couldn't do custom cards. You had to bolt on different plugins and add-ons and things. And the one that I came up with, or I didn't come up with it, but the one that I found actually from referral was Crockablock Jet Engine. And I have, I've had an unlimited license LTD for them for, I don't know, a few years. And it was a game changer at the time. Still use it. And I love what they're able to do because I have that dynamic data centric kind of mind to me. And their query builder is like kind of second to none seemingly. And the tools that I've like used heavily. And then you couple that with like a Bricks or really, Bricks, Elementor, Gutenberg, even at this point, there's a lot of options there. And that's to talk specifically to the data structures is normally how I create my custom post types taxonomies. There's even like components built into that now. The thing that I feel like you run into a little bit with a stack like this is when you're in the page building world, there's a lot of products that are around different ecosystems. So you're constantly trying to think, well, is this the right one? Maybe there's competing ones, so to speak, whether it's frameworks or just add-ons in general. Um, so that's something you have to weigh depending on what you want. Maybe some things ACF, as an example, integrates better with versus Jet Engine versus a MetaBox or what have you. But for the most part, that's been the way that I've personally handled it is Bricks, Jet Engine for all the dynamic data setup and everything like that integrates pretty much seamlessly for the most part, whether you're doing, facet searching or anything like that. And it's a pretty good 1-2 punch there specifically for, the actual structure of the website and then the data structures on the back end. So it's been working.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. And I think uh when we're talking here about data structure and using and leveraging the possibility of using dynamic data within post types, custom fields and stuff like that. For me personally, this I have a similar approach, especially when it comes down when I have to decide in a project. Um, yeah, how much flexibility does a client has have to be? Because at the end of the day, we always have different sorts of clients in our projects. We have content creators with no experience at all inside of WordPress. Have no like visual feeling for how to build content, how to build and structure a site, and with leveraging dynamic data and or building a very strict layout in a page, we can achieve to make sure that our design actually stays intact. So, how do you, for example, decide when to use dynamic data and when not?
So there's a lot of different schools of thought on this. A lot of different people doing different stuff, and I think that there's arguments to be made kind of on all sides. And I think that the way that I would initially think about this because the question comes up a lot is like you really have to be honest with yourself as an agency owner or a freelancer, like who you're building websites for. This is a whole topic, and I think there's a lot of people that would really get a lot of good value out of like hearing about how you can actually build websites for clients and depending on what level of website you're building at for what type of client, like the size and the scope of literally their business, it's going to matter. And I know you have a lot of experience with this because you've built sites for all different like large companies and things like that. And I think for most, if I could go like the most common route, people are probably building for like mom and pop shops, like just, local service businesses, things like that. If we stay in that camp for a second, I'm kind of the mindset that for most of those situations, I don't want to speak in too much of a generality, but in most of those situations, those clients should probably be working on their business, not necessarily in the website to an extent. And then also there's buckets in there. It's like, are we talking about the dynamic data, just the specific content that you would classify as like CMS data, let's say, versus literally going into like the grade design system and everything like that, or the bricks design system, or the layout of the pages and everything.
Mm.
Those are definitely two different things. And there's ways and tools, obviously, to make those things easier. But I think If we're talking about a business conversation, setting expectations, which is the most important thing that I've ever realized in all of agency world, if we're talking from that, I always think you should be a leader in the project, you should be an expert, and you should kind of like manage those expectations from the top. They could be whatever you want, but you kind of got to stick to them. And ultimately, if you're thinking about it, your clients probably aren't paying you to ask them what you should do, so to speak. So there's a lot there, and we could dive into it further. But I say all that to say that when I'm building a website for just a regular size business, I'm not trying to give them the whole keys to the castle. Don't misunderstand though. They own the website and they can do whatever they want. If they ask me, if they beat down my door, say, "Hey, Mark, I really want to go click the edit with bricks button," I'm gonna let them do that. But I'm gonna also tell them it's like, "Hey, this is a professional tool. You might screw something up, and we're gonna have to obviously charge you to fix those types of things." For the flexibility specifically, though, the middle ground is to use like, okay, let's create a team member CPT. Let's make this extremely easy for you where you can only go into the website, click team members, and then put in like the name, the position, upload a headshot, maybe, and hopefully auto optimize that or something like that. And then put it in, paste in a description and then click a magic button as they would think, and it goes automatically onto the website. That has worked really well for me in the scenarios where like they want some level of, control, but they realize, and we've set the expectations, like we're doing our job by not letting you go mess around with this. And you're doing your job by obviously doing whatever you have to do. Cause sometimes they do have to manage the content. I'm not stark one way or the other on that. This is not a blanket statement, but from my experience, that's kind of what it's been. And then as you go up the chain though, and you deal with bigger and bigger clients, immediately what's going to happen is they're going to have a marketing team, or they're going to have somebody that they want to like put on the website, so to speak, to like work on it and do different things. That starts to get a little more murky. And that's where there are tools within Bricks, but even the huge kudos to like what you can do with the block editor in Gutenberg. As you know, you can curate a better experience where it's like it's a little more simple in certain ways. You have a lot more control of how you actually refine that tool to actually do what you want, and to put it exactly how you need it for your client. So unfortunately, there's no simple answer to that. Hopefully, I kind of answered the flexibility question, but it just depends really, and you got to be honest with yourself with who you're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same, what I'm experienced. So, because at the end of the day, yeah, whether it's a small client or a big client, you have always to have in mind how complex the structure is, maybe where the client has to put the content actually in. You manage team members. Perfect example. I did this myself for years and years. This is the perfect example where you have to have a post type structure, because at the end of the day, if you want to change a team member, you obviously just want to go into your backend of the website, click on okay, new team member. Maybe a team member has left the company. You simply have to delete it. But there are implications then, because this team member might be as well a contact person on on a specific page. So if you work here on the page builder layer, you have to manually go in, delete it there, change it there, always. And then you get like the human error perspective here all the time. So you might forget something, because in your daily business, you have a couple of minutes to do that. You don't want to mess around with, okay, I need to integrate a padding here. I need to change something there. And yeah, so that's the perspective from the content creator and the designer as well. But the nice part is, if you, for example, build such a team post type or a contact post type properly, you can reuse it in every project. So I have prepared a little example. Thanks for the perfect overline here. So
Nice.
you could share something with the audience here, because exactly this thing with the team member I already prepared. So um, let's go here into my blueprint installation, which I normally use when I start a project. And in this case, on my homepage, there is directly down here a blueprint for team members, for example. So we have different images like title, position, phone number, email address, nothing too fancy. I can enhance it in every project, but the entire structure is already built. And if I start a new project, I just use this as my blueprint, as my starting point, and start working. So when I jump into the backend, Let's go quickly inside to the dashboard. So here is my team member. And for the content creator, it's really easy because at the end of the day, he creates a new member, like for example, Ethan here. And yeah, we have Ethan's name, we have position, email, phone, quote, we have his image. So nothing to break here. And we can use this data in different circumstances. So for example, if I create a page and Ethan is currently used here in this example topic page. But as you see, I already have an entire structure here running and it's automated because what I did is I used, it's a great specific part. It's a dynamic template, and this dynamic template is set up that it automatically takes like the post title of the page, because we're talking here about support teams, and it automatically takes a taxonomy. So I set up a taxonomy as a, as a relationship, because I don't only want to use this template in the specific sample page here. I want to use it, for example, in my software support page, which has here under contacts, the taxonomy software support as well. And in the front end, I have here specific my team members for the software contacts. So if a new member shall be in the software support team, I just go in and go into team, all members, and maybe let's see, okay, Jackson, now you're in the software support as well. Sorry, guy. So perfect, software support update. Going into the page. So jumping in here, software support. Yeah, there's Jackson Lee. If he wants or not. He has not the first support team. So yeah. And that's from a content creator perspective, from a user perspective, really easy because they just need to set a taxonomy. For me, as the person who builds the websites, it's as well really easy because I can use this specific example in the next project as well, because it's just another taxonomy. It's other team members, and maybe I use different data here. And that's the power you have when working with dynamic data. Yeah.
Um, all I can do is give you kudos there, Thomas, because one, I mean, that was a beautiful example, but two, that's genuinely my favorite part of building. Like as soon as I discovered dynamic data, I was like, this is powerful. There's a lot of things I can do with that. I mean, whether it's again CPTs, taxonomies, relationships, anything like that. Those are the things that I feel. Again, I never came from the designer background, so all my websites probably look kind of bland and just like chill. But like that's where I need the help with the dynamic data stuff. That is, it's comes so naturally, and I just see the power in it. So I try to keep telling people how powerful that is because I want them to implement that in their own work.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking here about the websites and web projects, leveraging dynamic data and building a proper structure, that's the most important part of a website, because a design can change, and a design obviously changes all the time over the years. There are some iterations. We have changes in corporate designs companies all the time, but the structure at the end of the day, which is the very foundation of a website, this stays the same. And if you have there something or a change over time, that's the most expensive part at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, I'm the same here. So I try always to work like structure first, always, because you have to have your client in mind, you have to have your team in mind, because this structure the entire team can work on. And
Mhm.
that's the interesting part, because then you as well get a standard inside your agency, because everyone uses this structure. Everyone knows, okay, if something goes wrong in this specific structure, okay, you need you know where to put something, and then you can roll it out to clients as well.
Mhm.
Um, but talking a bit about like design tools. I know you said you're not a designer, but when you do a web project, so you get obviously design from the client, or you have a different team member, or you team up with someone who does the design in Figma or in XD, or do you work always right away in WordPress? What is your
Yeah, yeah, I would say it definitely depends too. I mean, there's no hard and fast answers, I think, and a lot of what we do, obviously. But like I would say, kind of going back to the last question, it's similar for me from my experience. So I would say if it's a low cost project, right? If it's something, we all want to do like, bigger projects, more expensive, bigger clients. It doesn't always happen. If it's a lower cost project, um, I think there should always be a design phase. Like you probably shouldn't just like completely just jump in there. But at the same time, if we're being honest with ourselves as business owners, we can't, I don't like to charge per time necessarily. It's a different discussion. But if you are spending more time or less time, it's something to be considered, so to speak, in your whole business model. So if you have a website, if somebody needs a website, obviously, most of the time for me, my client has never really brought me designs. I'm sure that obviously exists and that has happened. So I'm really left with two options most of the time. It's either I need to try to design it myself or I can team up with somebody. Most of the time, I end up designing it myself because from my experience, the types of websites I've built are relatively similar, and they'll come to me with like, "Oh, we like that website." I'm like,
Mm.
"Okay, I can get you something that's like similar to that." So then it'll normally end up being, if it's a really robust, like lots of different, pages, custom post types, like we're doing a lot of real designing, templating, wireframing, probably best to start in something like a Figma. If you can even one up that, something that kind of like integrates with WordPress. So just a quick instance, like Frames, ACSS and Frames, there's a Frames for Figma that was just released again. And you can like build in Figma, and then you can also kind of like, it's all very similar. So you can build in Figma and you kind of bring it into your environment in like a bricks using
Mm.
Frames. So if you can find something like that, that'll even speed it up more. But I would say the larger the website, the more I would move towards a design tool. If it's a less involved website, less things going on, smaller budget, probably, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of times I've just gone into WordPress and I've used a templating library, whether it's Frames or something else, and I've just created the wireframes essentially in WordPress.
Mm.
Now there are some disadvantages to that sometimes, depending on, it's objectively kind of harder if you took like a designer and a web developer. Like it's harder to go into WordPress, drop everything in, and then maybe you have to move things or change things. It's easy, we'll say it like this, it's easy to get distracted with all the things that you could do, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
in your WordPress environment versus just, being in still a sophisticated platform like Figma, but you're not worrying about any of the functionality most of the time. You're just worrying about complete design. So that, to me, is, there are tools now that enable us, and template libraries and things, to jump in and go that route. I'm not saying I recommend it 100% of the time, but I would say that a lot of the projects that I've done, it's just like, you know kind of what you want. I can make that for you, with just starting out from that type of wireframing, and then you can kind of tweak it from there, because you're gonna have to make it your own anyway. But if you have a design background, I would definitely do that. I would charge for that, because it's a very valuable thing, and it can help way more before you go in there, because now you're getting into the realm of, one last point on this. When I said design phase, even though it's on the website, you have to distinguish what the design phase is, because you don't want to get into a situation where like the revisions just flow into the development portion. You have to manage those expectations, and your process has to be good, even if you're doing it in WordPress and not a design tool, would
Mm.
be my main thing if somebody was trying to take away from that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I always try to have at least a small design phase before starting the project, because first of all, I want to create obviously the design system, especially since we're working with full site editing now, where we have some kind of design system where, for example, with greatly enhanced this quite a bit, so we have a proper scalable responsive design system across all screens. But especially for that, I will pinpoint down like, okay, what are my space? What is my spacing grid, font sizing, color space, all of these parts, and then I start, trying or building again, like with these wireframes, like you have in Frames, for example,
Mhm.
starting building out the structure of the website, and already, but that's only my approach. Would be interesting what you think about that. Um, I try to get the client as soon as possible in the project, so we can already feel like, okay, this is actually a website. Um, if I open it up on a tablet, on a smartphone, on a desktop, okay, so that's kind of the user experience. And so over time, we then refresh, or we build out the front end design. So we refine it more and more, because as I mentioned before with the post type part. So yeah, we need to make sure that structure and the whole outer wireframe of the website is finished. And then we can talk about specific, okay, maybe yeah, increasing the gap sizing a bit, or padding and margin, and yeah, refining fonts and stuff like that. Yeah. So that's basically my idea, how I built this. Talking about, yeah, when to bring client on the project. So what's your yeah.
Yeah, that's another good one. I mean, I think I'm pretty much with you in the sense of as soon as possible. I think there's maybe like a little bit of a window there. Obviously, technical setup and things like that. You're gonna obviously do once you have something to maybe show them, specifically on the web side of it. Once you get into the website and can show them something there, that makes total sense. If they're in the design phase and everything, obviously, I think the most success that I've had is when like we do go through the design phase. Generally, projects take maybe like 6 to 8 weeks, like, for a standard one, we're having, like, a weekly meeting just to kinda keep up and everything like that. I mean, we didn't even talk about, like, getting the content from them. That's, like, a whole 'nother thing if they're doing the content,
Yes.
if they're giving you any content at all, which is always, potentially a nightmare sometimes, right? So it's like, you have to make that decision, and I think the sooner you can get that, the better, because when you're laying out your designs and things, it's way easier to have the content and fit that into a design that you're molding rather than, like, putting a design together and then being like, "No, I need, like, these types of images or this type of text,
Yep.
this length of text." There's a lot to be considered there. So I do like the idea of getting them involved as soon as possible. The thing that I would echo just again from personal experience is consistently from the get-go manage the expectations of what you're doing, like the actual scope of work, because
Mm.
you whatever your proposal said that you need to do, you can adjust that, but the deliverables adjust with the price. So, like, just make sure that that's always a thing in your mind as an agency owner or a freelancer. That's the biggest thing that's happened to me and so many other people that I talk about is they just want to provide value and they're not like, you're going through this process, you're getting people involved, you're having these weekly meetings with your clients, and they're like, "Hey, can we add this, this, this?" And you're just like, "Well, I guess because we haven't, like, actually broken ground maybe yet on the WordPress development or whatever." It's not like that. I mean, you already had it's tough to be, kinda strict like that sometimes, but just gotta continue to do that. And I mean, again, getting them involved I think really does help that because the more you talk to them, the more you can still understand. And maybe even like later in the project, you can be like, "Hey, I know we said we were going to do X, Y, and Z in this proposal. Why don't we do A, B, and C as well?" Obviously it's going to have some budget, implications. But if you're actually on their team and you know what they want, then you can make those recommendations and it's going to feel better because you know that you're actually providing value and you're going to make more money because of it. They're going to be happier. They're going to feel like you actually care about their project and they're going to see you more as what I was saying earlier, like an expert and a leader on that project. I think all this stuff is a little abstract if we're just talking about it high level, but I think when you're in it and you've done it a few times, you start to realize like, okay, this is actually what they want. They might not want to pay more money, but if they're getting more value, they do want that. So long-winded answer there to say that like I like to get them as involved as possible. And I think that ultimately ends up being better, throughout the project and beyond really.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's onboarding the client. You have to get the client on board. This speeds up at the end of the day your process, because the client does not ask any strange questions, because he knows he's in the process. He see how the actual website or the project is built. And yeah, in my past experience, it was often in a way that the client at the start of the project, they even didn't know what they need in their website. So this is as well the process. And yeah, first of all, you can speed up the building process of the website, and yeah, you have like a better understanding of the client. You involve with the client, you get involved with the client, so you can make sure, okay, the next project they make with us as well at the end of the day. Because
Exactly.
you're the professional and you help the client to achieve his goals at the end of the day. Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Um, a little switch of the topic, because We definitely need to talk about that because it involves us, and I've seen it today again from Matt, and I thought, okay, what he's doing now. So, what do you think about like new technology? And we always are at the brink of all the things, and yeah, with Bricks, with block editor, with full site editing, and so on. We always try to integrate new technology. So, okay, I say it; it's the best buzzword. Sorry for that. What about AI and the whole building process with AI when it comes down to websites? How did you implement AI already in your process?
Yeah, that's a big one. So high level, and then I'll get into like that. I would say high level, I'm trying to embrace it as much as I can, as much as I can like stomach embracing it to a sense. Like there's so many avenues. Like I've thought of so many ways that AI can help me. We're at this point right now in late 2024 where there is an abundance of tools, but they're all very just, absolutely, they're very new, right? Like relative to when like ChatGPT first became like the big one as a consumer, right? It's been going on behind the scenes, but now they're very consumer accessible. I think that if any of us in our industry or beyond like think that AI is not going to change the way that we're kind of working and used to working, you're probably not on the internet. You're not looking at these types of things because it obviously is. Like, I mean, people are coding with it. I've coded a one of the ways I've worked with it is I wanted to on my personal website. I wanted to show when I was live on YouTube. So I don't know how to do that. So I asked Claude, how do I create a WordPress plugin that pings the YouTube API every so many hours or whatever, and says, hey, I want to just display like a dynamic condition in Bricks and a dynamic tag and everything like that in there, and utilize that. So just hooking into the Bricks API, hooking into the YouTube API, something like that. Not difficult for somebody that knows what they're doing, but for me, I didn't know what I was doing. And Claude was able to just walk me through that process. Takes a little finagling, but AI coding, even for a noob, is like very, very accessible now.
Yeah.
I'm not recommending it on like a large scale necessarily. You still got to know what you're doing. But the fact that we can even do it now is very different. So that's definitely affected my workflow. I'm not gonna lie, it's heavily affected my workflow in just standard speed up tasks. Like if I'm doing like a YouTube video or if I'm doing anything where I need to summarize, I did this the other day, summarize a meeting. You just take the transcript from wherever it is, you throw it in Claude and you're like, hey, was I supposed to do a couple things? I think this person told me they wanted a couple things done. It tells you in a second, like the highlights of that. You don't have to rewatch the meeting anymore or re-listen to the meeting or anything like that or reread it. And then the other big one would be like speeding up. I guess it's kind of just that is speeding up the workflow specifically with all of it. But I just think that AI is coming. If you're scared of it, it's understandable, but I think you kind of need to get over that fear. What I would say though is I don't think could be a bad prediction. I don't know. I don't think it's gonna like take over us and jobs and things like that. I just think it's gonna make our jobs easier if you embrace it. And we're always going to have to continue to adapt and things like that. And I'm on the younger side. I'm like, I know that I have a lot of time that I have to deal with this, so I might as well kind of like at least try to play the game a little bit and understand and see it and utilize it as much as possible. But I mean, we're seeing it all the time. Like, I'm not saying Claude writes fantastic copy, but it can write copy, especially if you treat it like a copywriter. That's the other thing too with AI. AI is only as good as you are a prompter to it right now. And if you're a good prompter, then you can get some good stuff. But some other people will be like, "Oh, this is crap because I'm not getting anything out of it because I'm not kind of utilizing it right." It's a tool just like anything else. And those are some of the ways that I've tried to embrace it into the workflow. There's probably countless others that I haven't looked at just yet. That's kind of where we're at so far.
Yeah, for me, it was as well back then as ChatGPT came out. Okay, new tool, something to play around with, and yeah. Meanwhile, I mean, I use it on a daily basis, definitely, because if you need some like placeholder text or placeholder structure or so, while I'm building a website, I let ChatGPT do its work. Okay, it just copy paste in the material, and then I'm basically done. So for these little tasks, which tend to use too much time, but are not specifically to the process of building the page, for example, or building a structure or templates or anything else. I could, give this to ChatGPT, for example. It does the work, and I just copy and paste it in. I mean, today. Sorry for switching to German. Format, like with the post structure at the end. Anyway, yeah. So if you manage to set up like the AI agent, which is the new thing now, so the specific chat, okay, please react like this, and you train it, you can really use it as your second workforce. Yeah. It
100%.
will not replace the designer or the web designer, but it will make us better and way more efficient at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Can't
Yeah.
agree more.
All right. So, I think when we're talking about all of these topics, so web design, page building, there are a lot of different tools out there in the market. I mean, you're on the bricks, uh,
Mm.
but I think I read it yesterday. There is a new tool, Gutenbricks. Do you already used it?
Yeah, Gutenberg's. Yeah, I did a live stream a couple months ago with the developer Ryan Long. Ryan, definitely Ryan. I think it's Ryan Long. Ryan Lee. Sorry, Ryan. Sorry, Ryan. Anyway, Ryan, great developer of Gutenberg's. Um, but um, but he developed like a tool for Bricks and Gutenberg, and it basically kind of sits in the middle, so to speak, because the concept is that the block editor is more of like for everyone an easier experience, right? And some people obviously debate over that, but more or less like it is more ubiquitous. There's a lot there.
Mm.
There's a lot of really good redeeming qualities about the concept of everything behind that. Obviously, you guys know that at Grade, we are leveraging it highly. And the concept is though that Bricks being a like new upcoming page builder that's
Mhm.
kind of outside that realm of core, people want that similar experience because like we were talking about earlier, it's not very easy for me to give anybody access to anything in Bricks. We don't Bricks doesn't have components as of, us recording this right now. It's still coming. There's like a lot of different, things kind of there. And again, just throwing somebody into the Bricks environment is a little bit like throwing them in behind like the cockpit of an airplane. So there's a lot going on there. But what Gutenbricks does effectively is just kind of compartmentalizes and componentizes a lot of Bricks design. So you can kind of build things in Bricks and then basically come over into the block editor in Gutenberg experience, and the client would only have certain access to certain fields or button text and things like that. So not like a new concept necessarily, something that's like gaining a lot of traction in different builders and stuff like that. But for that integration, it's been pretty great for a lot of Bricks users, and really just people that want to enhance their, curate that experience for their clients. So, yeah, Brian's doing a lot of great work, and I think that's. I think people are following suit too. I mean, like the component idea. I mean, do you see it even core now with like I think partially sync patterns, like all those different pieces. It is a need that agency owners have, anybody building sites for anybody else, or even if you're building your own sites and you just want to like a quicker interface to change different things and,
Yeah.
componentize things. That's really important.
Yeah, I mean the basic idea behind components. We have it in Figma, obviously as a design tool. So you want to or change your designs globally. We have it in Adobe XD is now discontinued. So even I have to learn Figma now because I was an old Adobe XD guy. We have it as you mentioned in the block editor coming slowly. We have it in the suite, for example, with the dynamic templates. Because you don't want to reinvent the wheel all the time. You want to reuse your assets and you want to manage these assets centrally. So really interesting. So I have to try out Gutenbricks myself. I
Mm.
want to have maybe you can teach me a bit.
We could try. We could get
Yeah.
Ryan too. He'll definitely teach. Definitely.
Perfect.
Mm.
So, I think let's talk a bit about what we discussed today. So, what is from your perspective? So, what's the most important thing when we're coming or when we're talking to designers, when we're talking to web agencies? So, how actually make in your opinion, what has the most impact that you can, speed up your process? What are what are your ideas behind that?
Yeah, there's definitely a few things, and I think the first thing that I want to make is just a distinction because I was thinking about this earlier is the concept of like speed in web design, and more so specifically to probably the broader audience of like people that are building websites for other people. I think of speed as definitely kind of like a buzzword. It's definitely entertaining with the speed builds and everything like
Yeah.
that. But I think in the context of an agency, it does have a place. I just think sometimes it's miscommunicated, so to speak, which is no fault of anybody, but it's just I don't think of it as speed. I think of it as efficiency.
Yeah.
And like when you in order to get efficiency, you don't just like get efficiency. You can't even really like you can get efficiency by doing more, right? Like if you're just like better at doing something, maybe you're faster, maybe you're speedier. But in my mind, it's really two things. It's one, it's history and flexing that muscle and doing those things. The other thing though that really sets businesses apart, agencies, developers, whatever, is their process.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could throw in like tools as well into that mix. Maybe it's a three-prong approach, but the process part of it is really the next level of that. So and we've talked about this. We've talked about it kind of abstractly, right? Like making sure you're not recreating the wheel every single time. You're using your templates and things like that. So I would say that if we're talking specifically about like, oh, somebody comes up to you and says, "How do I make websites faster? Like, how do I physically build them faster?" You got to just think about like look at your last couple projects. Where did you waste the most amount of time, and how could you improve your process on each one of those? And you're going to find like 5 or 10 things that you could automatically have just been like, well, maybe I could have a blueprint site. Maybe I can have some more templates. Maybe I could reuse those things. Maybe I could have my data structures that I always use in place every single time. And those are kind of the main things. I know there's a lot there, but I would say focus on the efficiency aspect of it rather than just the result of being speedy. And that comes from literally what you do every single time in your process. And the last point is a little more business-y, but you gotta think about what you're actually doing from project to project, meaning like we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
what kinds of websites are you creating? When I say that I like the complex websites, those are not easy to produce in like fast quantities. They're harder than the smaller, like more straightforward websites because there's more things going on. We're talking about like planning your data structures and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot more time and energy that goes into that. Hopefully you make more money for those builds, but if you're focused on specific process and repeatability and everything like that, you may also want to consider doing things that are more repeatable just by their nature, which are tend to going to be like more basic or just simpler in general. And you can always scale from there. Would be my recommendation on just how to make faster and improve your process overall. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like you sometimes you have to get a step back and
Mhm.
give the whole project or the whole process a big picture and think, okay, what are the tasks I do over and over again? How to make them more efficient? How to leverage stuff like dynamic data? How to build it out properly? How to build maybe your own, yeah, templates, your own presets, your own blueprints in a way that it's later on really easy to yeah, alter, to change specific parts. So if you change the colors, if you change padding, margin, behavior, animations, I mean, you can always build like the proper structure before, just with the input data, just with when I talk about Gutenberg, so the right blocks in the right place, and then afterwards you just refine, and you have to reuse it all the time. And over time, you always see, okay, maybe I need another custom field, maybe I need this, and then you can update your process over time, and so we get over time more and more efficient. So you have basically at one time your own theme, your own basic theme, maybe per branch, per type of projects, and you have always a proper starting point where you can push out your project. Yeah.
Mm. Yep. Exactly it.
All right.
Mm.
So we wrapped everything up together. We talked about how to actually be more efficient as a designer, as an agency. And last thing I want to talk about now is, or I want to invite all of our guests. So first of all, if you liked the session, please subscribe our channel, and definitely subscribe to Mark's channel, because he is not only YouTuber, he is Bricks enthusiast. He's a WordPress nerd and a really fun guy to watch, definitely. And if you want to watch the next episode, it's actually with Jacob, Jessica, and Sandra, and they talk about a website as a service system and how to build this in WordPress. So see you next time.